Doings of Doyle is sponsored by Belanger Books, home of the best Sherlock Holmes anthologies featuring today's top Sherlockian authors. Belanger Books is the only authorised publisher of Solar Pond's mysteries, continuing the Sherlock Holmes legacy into the 21st century. Visit them today at belangerbooks.com. Welcome to Doings of Doyle, a podcast dedicated to the works of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the creator of Professor Challenger, Brigadier Gerard, and of course, Sherlock Holmes. I'm Mark Jones.
And I'm Paul Chapman. And together we'll be exploring Doyle's eclectic bibliography to understand more about the great man's life and work. We'll be discussing his fiction and non-fiction, the well-known and the obscure.
And stopping by Baker Street along the way. You'll find out more at doingsofdoyle.com or follow us at doingsofdoyle.com on Blue Sky. Hello and welcome to episode 71. This time we travel to Sudan in the 1890s, where a naïve reporter learns a thing or two from his more experienced rivals in The Three Correspondents, which was first published in 1896. And here's Paul to tell us more.
During the opening stages of General Sir Herbert Kitchener's reconquest of the Sudan in the mid-1890s, a trio of British correspondents has become detached from the main body of Kitchener's force. The group prepare to bed down for the night in a palm grove when they encounter a lone British railway engineer in a heightened state of agitation. Naturally, they scent a story in the air. Shortly afterwards, they encounter the engineer again. Shots ring out, accompanied by a small party of Mahdist warriors. The correspondents are armed, but nevertheless this is real danger. It is also copy. And what is danger when each man here owes a level of duty to his editor and, of course, his readers?
Now, The Three Correspondents is a story drawn directly from Conan Doyle's personal experience, and we'll cover that in a bit more detail as we get into the episode. But for now, here are the main facts of the case, as it were. So ever since 1893, when Conan Doyle's wife Louise had been diagnosed with tuberculosis, the family had adopted a peripatetic lifestyle, moving to different locations to aid her recovery. And it was towards the end of 1895 that Conan Doyle and his wife Louise travelled to Cairo for the winter, where they based themselves at the Mina House Hotel within walking distance of the pyramids. While they were there, Conan Doyle started working on Uncle Bernac, his Napoleonic novella, and he finished a play based on Halves by James Payn, but the weather seems to have disagreed with him, and the letters to his mother at this time reveal a certain listlessness. Then in January 1896, he and Louise took a Nile voyage to the Wadi Halfa aboard the Thomas Cook paddle steamer, the SS Nitocris. They returned to Cairo to find the city in the midst of ratcheting up of imperial tensions. News had reached them of the Jameson raid in South Africa. But more importantly, there were strong rumours that there was going to be an expedition against the Mahdists in the Sudan. Thrilled at the prospect of following an expedition, Conan Doyle first got permission from his wife Louise to accompany the troops, and then called on the Westminster Gazette, which was owned by George Newnes, the owner of the Strand magazine, to take him on as a war correspondent, which would then allow him to travel with troops to the front line. And indeed, he spent a month with the troops, but actually saw very little action and returned somewhat out of sorts. But armed with three ideas that would serve him for stories. There was the tragedy of the Korosko, the debut of Bimbashi Joyce, and the story that we're looking at today, The Three Correspondents. He and Louise returned to England in May 1896, and it was probably around that time that he wrote The Three Correspondents, which was then first published in the Windsor magazine in October of the same year. And it was shortly thereafter anthologized in The Green Flag and Other Stories of War and Sport in 1900. And this really is one of those stories of war being steeped in what we know now as the Mahdist War, which was fought from 1896. And there's quite a strong history here that we probably need to bring all the listeners up to speed on just to be able to get a sense of this story and the events that we're going to be covering.
Yeah, it's as with all these things, it's a complex story, and I'll try and simplify it as much as possible. But at the bottom of it, it's all about India.
Yeah.
Until 1879, the only way to get to India had been to sail around the Cape of Good Hope and South
Mm.
Africa. But a French engineer, Ferdinand de Lesseps, had this idea in the mid-19th century to make a canal
Mm.
linking the Red Sea to the Mediterranean
Yeah.
to shorten the journey completely. Something the British didn't like the idea of at all, and they kept a wary eye on this. The project itself looked as if it was never going to work, but it did,
Mm.
and was opened in 1879. Cut a long story short, British Prime Minister Benjamin Disraeli saw an opportunity to buy a majority share
Mm.
in the Suez Canal, and basically took it under British ownership almost. At this time, Egypt was technically run by the Ottoman Empire.
Mm. Mm.
But there was a movement for Egyptian independence in the air as well, and this grew into a revolt led by an Egyptian Colonel Arabi, which really blew up in 1882. And this was initially going to be put down by the British and the French. The French pulled out, but the British still carried on with this. Defeated Arabi at the Battle of Tel el-Kebir in 1882, and he essentially took over control of Egypt. It didn't become a British colony. It was a
No.
protectorate because it
Mm.
was still under the suzerainty of the Ottoman Empire. But to all intents and purposes, it was run by the British
Mm.
and Consul General Sir Evelyn Baring, who later became Lord Cromer.
Mm.
So the British, they essentially got Egypt almost by accident
Yeah.
here, essentially to guard routes to India. But the thing they also got with Egypt was this great tract of land beneath it, the Sudan,
Mm.
which had been added to Egypt's possessions by again another renegade character who turned up in the mid-19th century, Mehmet Ali, who took Egypt over from the Mamluks who had been running it for the Ottomans.
Yeah.
And he decided to conquer the Sudan. So a lot of the Sudan was in Egyptian hands when Britain took it on. And reluctantly, Britain took on a certain degree of responsibility for the Sudan.
Mm.
But this was also at the time they dealt with Arabi, but then there was an uprising in the Sudan. A Muslim prophet essentially appeared in the Sudan, Muhammad Ahmed, who called himself the Mahdi, the expected one.
Yeah.
And he started to fight for independence from Egypt, and Britain got dragged into that conflict. And basically, that ended messily with an Egyptian army led by the British officer William Hicks being massacred at Kordofan in
Yeah.
1883. And then the famous story of General Gordon, who'd actually
Mm.
worked in the Sudan earlier, putting down slavery. He was brought back, and various circumstances ended up besieged in Khartoum and was killed by Mahdist forces in Khartoum
Mm.
just before a British relief expedition got there. But it caused an awful furore in Britain. Gordon was a national hero. It tainted Prime Minister Gladstone's reputation for good after that. Gladstone had been known as the Grand Old Man, GOM. He then became MOG, Murderer of Gordon.
Mm.
So all this came to the fore at the time. But the British, after Gordon's death, the British lost the appetite for intervening in the Sudan and essentially left it to the Mahdists
Yeah.
for the rest of the 1880s and most of the 1890s.
Yeah.
In the mid 1890s, General Kitchener, who had been a young intelligence major involved with the Gordon Relief Expedition in the early 1880s, and Gordon was one of his great heroes, and he was
Yeah.
itching to avenge him. Kitchener, by this point, was in the position. He was head of the Egyptian army, the Anglo-Egyptian army, and he was able to put together a force to take the Sudan out of the hands of the Mahdists. And
Mm.
it's the early stages of this
Yeah.
that Conan Doyle is involved with. This is the very beginning of Kitchener's campaign, which would go on until September 1898.
Yeah.
So Doyle is seeing the beginning of it, and this is why the action hasn't really started.
Yeah, that's right. And there were strong rumors towards the end of 1895 that there was going to be some action
Mm,
against the Mahdist, even by then. So that's an interesting perspective on why Conan Doyle chose to go to Cairo. I think Andrew
mm,
Lycett
mm,
suggests that actually he may well have fancied the idea that there was going to be some action there that he might be able to witness before he chose to travel. I think the other thing is that it's worth saying that the impact of the death of Gordon on the
mm,
imperial mindset is so phenomenal, and it's still carried right through to the 1890s and indeed beyond.
mm,
Um, Gordon was really held up as being both, a Western Christian imperialist hero, and his death, which even dear Dr. Watson
mm,
is influenced by, is with his engravings of a Gordon on the wall of Baker Street. Um, that was an enormous shock, and the widespread criticism of Gladstone and the government's failure to
mm,
respond was still hanging over the air right through to 1895.
This is, I mean, and Kitchener knew he could play on this. I mean, he really felt that for England's pride almost, he had to defeat the Mahdists and avenge Gordon.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
this
yeah,
this was very much a driving force, as well as Kitchener's own ambition,
yeah.
because he knew that if he could, pull off this campaign,
Mm.
it would really fit him up for future senior appointments, and which is exactly what happened.
So it's into this febrile atmosphere that Conan Doyle creates the story of the Three Correspondents. And the Three Correspondents themselves are really fascinating characters.
Mm,
We'll come on to a bit what the nature of the war correspondent role was, but Conan Doyle does his characteristic, very quick establishment of these three characters as distinct archetypes. So we have Mortimer of the intelligence, who is said to be tall, straight, hawk-faced, in khaki and riding breeches, and he's very much depicted as the Saxon character, slow, conscientious, and deliberate, and the most solid of the three. Um, and opposing him is Scott of the Courier, who is said to be small and quick, mercurial, with a blue-black curling beard and hair. And he's the Celtic type, the quick, happy-go-lucky and brilliant. And Conan Doyle does this lovely job of contrasting the two, the solid Mortimer and the what he describes as the more attractive, the more dynamic, the Celtic Scott. Um, you know, Interesting choice of a name for a Celt there.
mm.
And then the third is our narrator is Annalee of the Gazette, a young, inexperienced, and said to be rather simple looking. And there's a wonderful bit of description there. There was a pleasing diffidence about his bearing which recommended him to his experienced companions, and if they had a smile sometimes at his guileless ways, it was soothing to them to have a comrade from whom nothing was to be feared. So classically, you get a narrator character who is rather less well defined than the other two characters in this. But it's interesting, isn't it, that in that description, Conan Doyle is harking back to an old favourite thing of his, which is the juxtaposition of the Saxon and the Celt, which is something that we see repeatedly in his stories.
But interestingly, we get with Mortimer that yeah, he's the solid character and got him the khaki, but he has a red cummerbund.
He
So
does.
there's a flash of glamour thrown
Absolutely.
into that costume. And again, this is the kind of this Doylean touch
Yeah.
that just pick up on this slight thing and say, he's got this side to him as well. That there's a flashy element in there.
Oh, yeah. And these are really
Mm,
charismatic
mm,
characters. I mean, one of the great hallmarks of this story is how it's a very amusing story.
mm,
And they really come across as being, very genuine characters. You can imagine them around the campfire exchanging barbs as well as being comrades and comrades in arms at the right
mm,
time. And that's one of the important things that's established very quickly here is that professional rivalry between the group. um, Conan Doyle says of Mortimer and Scott, either would have sacrificed himself to help his companion, but either would also have sacrificed his companion to help his
Mm,
paper.
mm,
And that's kind of the whole setup here. So we probably need to say something a bit about war correspondents themselves because they were relatively new at this time.
mm,
I mean, the origin of them, probably the first one is William Howard Russell, going
mm,
back to the 1850s, who was an Irish reporter for the Times who spent 22 months covering the Crimean War and famously sent letters back from the siege of Sevastopol and covered the charge of the Light Brigade. And it was, in
mm.
fact, his accounting of the charge of the Light Brigade that informed Tennyson's famous poem. But he also went on to cover the likes of the Indian Rebellion, the American Civil War, the Austro-Prussian War, the Franco-Prussian War. He's an enormous character, but he's only
Mm.
one of several because there are quite a few famous war
Mm.
correspondents. They became celebrities in their own time, and particularly in the 1890s, because this is the period of the great glamour and the great age of the war correspondent.
And with this being the great age almost of the war correspondent, there's so much conflict going on around the world. We actually get this with the two journalists with their backgrounds and their experience.
Mm.
We've got Scott had done Plevna, the Shipka, the Zulus, Egypt, Swakim. Mortimer had seen the Boer War, the Chilean, the Bulgarian and Servian, the Gordon Relief, the Indian frontier, Brazilian rebellion, and Madagascar. I mean, this sounds like a roll call of Flashman's
It does.
career. But again, it just show you all the, what opportunities were out there at the time and why this was such a golden age of war correspondence
Mm.
and almost an age in which war can be treated as more of an adventure. And
Yes,
the First World War would change that attitude
massively.
forever.
Yeah,
So we've got that chronicled in this story.
yeah.
As you said, the tone is set really by William Howard Russell,
Mm.
who his dispatches from the Crimea and his air of righteous indignation
Yeah.
at what was going on there, the incompetence of the British High Command, and ever, the fact that whatever victories they are pulled off by the troops themselves,
Yeah.
and this kind of the British Tommy in adversity is very much a character who comes into this, and with Russell as well. He actually, where you've mentioned Balaclava,
Mm.
but he also reported on the Battle of Inkerman, and that's where he gives one of the phrases or misquoted phrases to the English language when he talks about the Highlanders there, the thin red streak,
Oh,
which
yes.
then becomes the thin red
Red
line
line. Mm.
in popular culture. So Russell is still quoted in a way to this day, but hugely important character. But as you say, Mark, he then sets the benchmark for
Yeah.
those who follow him, and there's a long list. Um, you get a real mix with this as well because a lot of the war correspondents are also serving soldiers
Yes.
as well. So
Yeah.
you got people like Frederick Gustavus Burnaby, of the Blues, who would constantly check in sick, to go off to go to other wars that his regiment hadn't been sent to, and would write reports on them. And he wrote the famous book A Journey to Khiva, where he went on horseback through Central Asia, checking what the Russians were up to, and wrote a best-selling book while he was at it.
Gustavus is
And
a great middle
yeah,
name,
it's
isn't it?
fantastic. I mean, it goes with the character who's, massive, physically massive man. And ironically enough, or fittingly enough, really, he died during the Gordon Relief Expedition. He was killed at the Battle of Abu Klea, in 1884, potting Mahdist with a shotgun. But they got him in the end. So you got him, Colonel Valentine Baker, who was actually a disgraced British officer who was he'd actually been dismissed and cashiered from the army for assaulting a young lady on a train.
Oh,
And he ended up in the Turkish army and then the Egyptian army. But he also wrote reports Another interesting character is Thomas Gibson Bowles, who
Mm.
founded the magazine Vanity Fair with Fred Burnaby. And Bowles he'd been reported from Paris in 1870 during the siege and the Commune.
Mm.
He was out there, Tommy Bowles. Um, and of course, one of the most famous soldier journalists is Winston Churchill,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
who is present in the Sudan campaign in its closing stages in 1898. Really annoys Kitchener
Yes.
with his writings, and then he wrote a book on it, The River War, which really annoyed Kitchener. You've got them, and then you've got the actual reporters themselves. Another famous one, Charles Norris Newman,
Mm.
who reported on the Zulu War. He was known as Noggs popularly after Newman Noggs and Nicholas Nickleby. There's a very distinctive portrayal of him in the film Zulu Dawn by
I was going to
Ronald
say,
Lacey
yeah,
is
it's Ron
wonderful
Lacey. Yeah.
and really shows the way that journalists could rub up against generals. Another famous G.A. Henty, who was
Yeah.
also a war correspondent as well as writing adventure stories for boys. And he actually wrote one on this campaign. I think it's with Kitchener in the Sudan.
Yeah.
But he was involved in the Abyssinian expedition of 1868. And then there were a number in the Sudan. And Edmund O'Donovan, who was a former Fenian,
Mm.
and he'd reported on again the Russian incursions in Central Asia, and he was actually killed with William Hicks in the
Yeah.
Kordofan expedition of 1883. So it's a dangerous job as well.
Yeah.
These guys actually they put their lives on the line.
Yeah, and that summary kind of really showcases the enormous personalities, and it comes through in their writing, and they became
Mm,
celebrities in and of
mm,
themselves. Went on to write their own, quite staggering accounts. G.W. Stevens is the other
mm.
one in there as well, the Daily Mail correspondent who covered the 1898 Sudan campaign and wrote with Kitchener to Khartoum.
Mm, yeah, and so Stevens is a particularly interesting choice because he was a young journalist, really moving up in the profession, as you say, did this book, and he was actually one of the few journalists that Kitchener liked. Kitchener was
Yeah.
renowned for his dislike of journalists. The story of him in the Sudan pushing a group of them out of the way as he comes out of his tent, "Out of my way, you drunken swabs!" He really, but Stevens, he did get on with, and Stevens again was killed in the Boer War. So another
Yeah.
one
Yeah.
who gave his life for his profession.
Yeah. And the that sort of highlights as well one of the really interesting aspects of the war correspondent's job. They have a peculiar relationship with the army in
Mm,
that they are both critics and critical friends, but also they can be ex-soldiers, they can be in the midst of it. And one of the things that comes out in the Three Correspondents is this kind of this mutual dependency on the
mm,
army, isn't there? There's a line about the fact that oh, don't worry about there being a battle because there'll never be a battle until the press
mm,
corps turn up,
mhm,
which is a lovely little comic line about it. And later I think Scott says, I've never been to a battle where there hasn't been the press table already laid
mhm,
out. But there is this kind of symbiotic relationship with the army. I mean, the war correspondents obviously wouldn't exist without conflicts to cover.
mm.
But there is a tension there, isn't there? And that relationship it can often be fraught.
Oh, it's often, and it's still fraught
Yeah,
to this day, because obviously the military are always worried that journalists are going to give things away, all that sort of, as well as this uh, almost natural antipathy
yeah,
between soldiers and journalists. And I mean, this is where we come back to William Howard Russell. Is before Russell, they didn't really exist. You know,
no,
we don't have journalists out with Napoleon's or Wellington's army.
no,
This
no,
is something that comes in the mid 19th century, and Russell provides the template,
yeah.
and after him. you do have all these characters we've just been discussing, and
Mm.
that goes through to this day. I mean, the war correspondents that we've got now are very much still in that tradition, where you talk about the table of journalists. They will have certain
Yeah,
cafes, in Vietnam or Afghanistan
yeah,
to this day. There's this press corps, and it's they are a brotherhood, and now brotherhood and a sisterhood,
yes,
because
yeah.
they're all in this common danger together, and they've also a lot of the time got a common enemy in the soldiers,
Yeah, yeah, and
someone
also
they can gripe about.
yeah, and
Mm,
I think the other thing that Russell gives is because his first letters are so critical of the army and, like you
mm,
say, and so defensive of the ordinary Tommy, against the incompetence of the generals, that
mm,
it almost sets a kind of standard that everybody else has to then meet.
mm,
Um, so it's no wonder that when Conan Doyle appears in returns back from his trip up the Nile in January 1896 and discovers that the whole thing's about to go up, that he gets very excited at the prospect of becoming a war correspondent. So just to cover a bit of the what's going on for him around this time, he when he'd arrived in Cairo in November 1895, he'd actually met and mixed with Major Reginald Wingate, who was the director of military intelligence. So he already had a bit of a sense of what was going on here
mm,
before he went up on this Nile cruise. And then, obviously, when he returned, he discovered that things were in a rather heightened state, and he had planned to leave when he got back from that Nile cruise, but he was disinclined to do so because of the threat of this impending action. But he'd intended to run up the Nile to Wadi Halfa with a chap called Julian Corbett, who was the correspondent from the Pall Mall Gazette, and he would later go on to be a military strategist and also a great naval historian as well.
mm,
And Conan Doyle tried first to become a war correspondent for the Times because he needed official sanction to get north of the Aswan, I think it was.
mm, mm,
But actually, he couldn't. They didn't reply, and so it was through the News connection that he went back to the Westminster Gazette.
mm,
And actually, he did file 8 reports for the Westminster Gazette during that month, and they make really fascinating reading. I think they're a kind of exercise in making something from nothing. There's actually a forerunner letter he writes to the Speaker on the 8th of February 1896 called On the Egyptian Frontier, which really is an argument that the British troops need to remain in place because there was some question then as to whether or not they were going to be leaving Egypt and the Sudan. And then when he's in the Westminster Gazette, his letters appear over April and May of 1896. And as I said, he saw very little in the way of action. There were a couple of skirmishes, but he does manage to really give a great sense of what is going on at the time. The first of those letters, a letter from Cairo, which came out on the 1st of April 1896, is absolutely brilliant. And that's his description actually of the Turf Club in
mm,
Cairo, where he's talking about the officers getting together, and it has pen portraits of the like of Cromer and Kitchener, and it's a real exercise in sort of knitting together something
mm,
from nothing. So for all he didn't really see much in the way of action, I think his letters back are pretty good examples actually of the
mm.
war correspondence art, I think.
And he's also showing at that stage, I mean, Doyle had a skill at this throughout life of cultivating people.
Yeah,
And he's cultivating a lot of the officers, and getting, like, as you say, Wingate is a particularly important character to get to know,
yeah,
because
quite.
Wingate had his fingers in many pies and
Mm.
was he was the spy master
Yeah.
of the Sudan. So Doyle, he was moving in the right circles. And there's also, I mean, the fun side to oddly fun side of things. I love the story about him going off with Colonel Wilson,
Yeah.
to, I think it was a Coptic monastery in of all things, the golden state coach that had been built for the Emperor Napoleon III, in case he'd gone along to the opening of the Suez Canal. So there's this kind of uh, strange, stranger than fiction
Yes.
element
Yeah.
to some of what was going on. It's also notable. You've mentioned his innovation
Mm,
at this time as well, and he's almost wondering what to do
yeah.
a lot of the time, and he's as you said, he's trying to finish halves and write Uncle Bernac. But you would think as well with we've talked about this before with his kind of interest in mummies with lot number 249
Mm,
and the Ring of Thoth, that ancient Egypt would really
yeah.
draw him in. But he seems to have been less interested in that
Not at
when he
all.
was there.
Mm,
And he actually says at this time, I confess that modern Egypt interests me more than ancient. So interested am I that I seriously think of writing a popular history of the place from the time of Arabia's rebellion. It really beats any fiction.
yeah.
So he was interested in what was going on in contemporary Egypt.
Yes.
It drew him in, and he's obviously, if he's think of writing a book, that's again why he's cultivating all these contacts. We know
Yeah.
it never happened, the book, but again, it shows his mind was in in this sort of kind of journalistic historian mode
Yes.
at the time, and he knew he was in the middle of the build up to something historical as well, with what was going on in the Sudan.
Yeah, yeah, and of course he would go on to be a war correspondent himself of
Mm,
sorts. In that, his experience in the Boer War leads to the
mm,
writing of the Great Boer War. He writes, the cause of conduct in the war in South Africa, and
mm,
then a visit to three fronts is an aspect of that as well, albeit rather more sort of controlled. But they are nevertheless first-hand experiences that
mm,
are then used to report back. It's interesting what you say there about his attitude towards ancient Egypt, because it is one of the things that's quite striking, I think, is his lack of interest. He famously climbs the Great Pyramid, doesn't he, with Louise,
mm.
which I don't doesn't strike me as being terribly good for somebody with tuberculosis. But anyway, they do, and they get to the top and go, "Oh, well, is that it?" and come back down
Mm.
again. So
No,
they're not terribly interested. But it is. I think this is where it ties into the imperialist narrative
mm,
in this story, which is that for Conan Doyle, I think Egypt was all about the um, the great developments and progress that had been brought in by British
mm,
officers and engineers and the like. And so this was all a kind of statement of imperial progress and the magnanimity of the Victorians towards
mm,
the native Egyptians. And
mm,
he very much saw this as kind of like the fulfillment of the imperial mission. And probably his imperialist rhetoric is stronger in this period of time than it is almost anywhere else, I think, in his writings. This period of late 1890s, it seems to be
mm.
particularly strong. And when we eventually come on to, the tragedy of the Korosko, you get it there as well.
And it's at this particular time, it is a real changing point in the empire. We're going to have eventually Kitchener's victory at Omdurman in
Yeah.
1898. It's almost going to be the high watermark,
Yes.
because then after that you've got the Boer War,
Yeah. Yeah.
and that really shows the weaknesses
Yeah.
of the British Empire. Whereas in the Sudan, it is, we can avenge our heroes. We can bring civilization to this benighted part of the world as they would see it.
Yeah.
And so all that is going on, and it's also at the same time we've got Queen Victoria's Diamond Jubilee
Yeah.
in 1897. So everything historically seems to be culminating at this point, and then we're going to. I mean, I know it is a simplification, but we're going to then see the decline.
Oh, yeah.
Mm,
Yeah. I think that's entirely fair.
mm,
Yeah.
mm,
So Conan Doyle had quite a lot of experience as a war correspondent without really ever being engaged as one, other than by the Westminster Gazette. But you get some of his early reflections on that experience here in the Three Correspondents, because the character of Anley is very much an avatar for
mm.
Conan Doyle, isn't he?
Yeah, there's that definite sense about him, because Doyle, this time, although definitely not a rookie writer, is a rookie correspondent, and
Yeah,
he will have felt that amongst the experienced members of the press corps. You've mentioned part of the description of Annalee, and we've got the fuller one here. Is the third man was Annalee of the Gazette, young, inexperienced, and rather simple looking. He had a droop of the lip, which some of his more intimate friends regarded as libel upon his character. His eyes were so slow and so sleepy that they suggested an affectation. It's quite interesting actually with Doyle at this time. I mean, I'm sure it's not part of the story, but his own eye had been damaged.
Yeah,
In his time in Cairo, he fell off a horse and was kicked, I think, over his right eye.
yeah, that's right.
Had to have 5 stitches, and if you look at photographs, his eye drooped ever after
Thereafter.
that. So
Yeah.
I don't know whether this is a little reference to that or it's just one of those
Mm,
coincidences.
mm.
And then he says of Anneli, a leaning towards soldiering had sent him twice to autumn manoeuvres, which is an interesting thing with Doyle himself. Obviously, he had a leaning towards soldiering, but he also attended after this. It was in September 1898. He attended the large-scale manoeuvres on Salisbury Plain. In
Mm,
1898, and again he was hobnobbing with some of the top generals at that time, like Wolseley and Buller and Roberts.
mm.
So this character definitely, even though this is before, there's compound of Doyle in there,
Oh,
quite
yeah.
definitely. And with the identification of Doyle as Anneli, perhaps the clincher is that Anneli works for the Gazette, with
Yes.
Doyle working for the Westminster Gazette at
Yeah,
this time.
that's true. That's a bit of a giveaway.
So there's definite sort of self-reference
Yes.
and a touch of self-mockery
Yeah, I think so.
going on in Anneli's character.
Mm.
And as I say, although he's described as younger than Doyle was at this time, there's still that element of not fish out of water, but definitely the greenhorn.
Yeah, definitely. And also you get through Annalee the freshness of Conan Doyle's perspective as a new war
Mm,
correspondent. So he's
mm,
he's making commentary on the art of the war correspondent. There's a
mm,
very funny bit early on where they encounter first off this railway engineer called Merriweather,
mm.
and Mortimer, I think, dashes off very quickly a kind of 8 or 10 word telegram. And they quickly demonstrate between them, Mortimer and Scott, that a decent editor would be able to turn that into half a
Mm.
page of copy, basically. So
And I don't know about you, Mark. I get the sense reading this, it's like McCardle
yes,
in the Lost World,
yeah,
and
it
you
is.
again get that world, that newspaper world, very much described in very much the same sort of way. And McCardle is obviously that sort of editor, the experienced editor who can just put copy together on just a few spare words.
Yeah, yeah,
Mm,
that's right. I think there's also in here Conan Doyle's clearly. Well, I think he wants to posit a kind of ethical question as well
mm,
about the behavior. There's clearly an incredible fondness for war correspondence, for all the glamour and the drama
mm,
and the romance of it as well. But Annally asks this rather naive question. I should have thought if three men were to combine and to
mm.
share their news, they would do better than if they were each to act for themselves, and they would have a much pleasanter time of it. The two older men sat with their bread and jam in their hands and an expression of genuine disgust upon their faces. The whole idea that you could possibly suggest this is wonderful. Why it would take away the whole glory of the profession, cried
Mm.
Scott.
And that really is something Doyle will observe with
Oh,
the egotism
yeah,
of these
completely.
characters and the competition and the love of competition.
Yes.
I mean, this is probably how so many of them were killed.
Yeah,
It
absolutely.
is that competitive element that just gets them into trouble, and they relish it. It's part of the job and it's part of the appeal of the job.
Yeah, I did enjoy the allusions to another couple of war correspondents in the story. There's Chandler who faked a
Mm,
broken leg to get to the telegraph office first,
mm, mm,
and there's Westlake who pretended to be a government courier. So
mm,
they're basically saying, look, all bets are off. It's
mm,
it's who gets to the wires first that
mm,
matters, and that's obviously going to be the big setup for this for the story.
mm.
But it gives us plenty of opportunity for comedy, doesn't it, all the way through?
Oh yeah, it's again this touch that Doyle has. These there is a real dark edge to this story, and it's that Doyle's ability to really put comic elements
Mm,
into what a story which it goes both ways, and there is a death here of Merriweather, the engineer. Never mind the gruesome deaths that led to the correspondence inflict in self-defense.
Yeah, that's right.
Mm,
And this is where the story is problematic for us today as well,
mm,
because there's definitely racist elements in this as well. I mean, there are things that I won't quote here, but you're getting into all
mm,
manner of high imperial values.
mm,
Even the kind of resting on the abolition of the slave trade and Gordon's work
mm,
in the Sudan as being a kind of a justification for, frankly, whatever the British forces wished to get away with at this time. This is something that comes out in this story, and it comes out completely offhand. And I think, any readers reading it now will be immediately attuned to that. An example here, when they're being ambushed, the narrator says, the African had never taken kindly to the rifle, and his primitive instinct to close with his enemy is always too strong for his sense of strategy. So that idea of, they're not clever enough to know what they're actually doing.
mm. It's also always played this sort of attitude is also possibly disguised behind the respect of the European for the heroism
Yeah.
of the opponent who seems to have spurned modern weaponry. Yeah, and it's also it's a bit of a lie in itself.
Mm. Mm.
This idea. I mean, for instance, in the Sudan, part of the reason the Mahdi was able to recruit so well and to make such advances was the fact after, say, the destruction of William Hick's column,
Mm.
he got a lot of modern Remington rifles. He
Yes,
got
quite.
artillery and their crews with them. You know, the Egyptian crews who survived were shanghaied into working for
Yes.
the other side, and
Yeah.
so it wasn't quite this picture
No,
that we're presented. It's as with all these things, it's infinitely more complex.
it is indeed, and
Mm,
there's an element to which, obviously, by saying how noble the enemy is in
mm.
their aggression and their tactics, essentially covering the fact that the press column in this party have been caught with their pants down. Really, this is just kind of trying to, make themselves not feel quite so bad about what
Mm.
has happened. I have to say, Conan Doyle's does a good job on the war correspondence sort of phlegmatic approach. I think it's Mortimer turns around and goes, "Oh Lord, there's our kettle gone," as it gets
Yes.
shot off the fire.
Mm,
This is getting sultry. I
mm,
confess that the idea of the back room at the authors' club begins to
mm,
grow
mm,
upon me. You can imagine it's coming straight out of Carry On Up the Khyber,
mm.
right at the end of that.
Yeah, it's one of those things where the way it was looked at the time hides what can sometimes be some rather unpleasant attitudes, and I mean, obviously, Carry On Up the Khyber does that. The one we get here is when the correspondents are under attack is a discussion about the weaponry and the ammunition
Yeah, yeah,
involved. You get a comment from Scott
mm,
to Annerly when they're under attack. He says, "There are ways and means," said Scott. "The Geneva Convention does not hold south of the First Cataract.
mm,
It's easy to make a bullet mushroom by a little manipulation of the tip of it,"
yeah,
which is basically turning standard pointed nose bullets into what are commonly known as dum-dum bullets or
yeah,
expanding bullets,
mm,
which cause far worse wounds
yeah,
than a standard tip. And it's just done in this casual, almost comic way.
yes,
And it's actually touching on an issue that was in the air at the time. Is that the British Army in the Sudan? Not it wasn't a universal practice, but there were definite issuings of soft nose ammunition.
yeah, yeah,
Some of the press caught on to this, and there was trouble in Britain
yes, yeah,
that this isn't right. This isn't sporting,
yeah,
and it shouldn't go on. And I mean, I mentioned earlier Fred Burnaby, Colonel Fred Burnaby, were killed at
yes,
Clear with his shotgun, and there was an outcry about him using that weapon because of the wounds it would cause.
yeah,
It's one thing in hunting and sport, but it's not it has a different effect in war, and the image created of basically Burnaby just potting dervishes.
yes,
It doesn't sit easily.
yeah. Well, that reference to the dum-dum bullets is an unusual piece in this because actually, otherwise, it's trying to present the Europeans as being, um, on a higher moral plane or level of civilization and
Mm,
progress. There's even the line, the law-abiding Briton is so imbued with the idea of the sanctity of human life that it was hard for the young pressman to realize that these men had every intention of killing him and that he was at perfect liberty to do as much for them. So,
mm.
this idea that, well, we wouldn't have touched them unless they, had attacked us. But, that
But then you come to the, yeah, but it's your armies invaded you.
exactly. Yeah,
You go round in circles on this one.
exactly.
There's also the argument used in this story about the practical value of
Yes.
this sort of weaponry. And Conan Doyle, before he went on this expedition, had bought himself an Italian revolver,
Mm.
and he was probably a bit mocked for that. And you get in the story, Mortimer says to Annalie, "I carry this big bore double-barreled pistol loaded with slugs. You might as well try to stop one of these fellows with a pea shooter as with a
Mm.
service revolver."
Mm.
So there's that attitude is there, and this was used as the official reason as well for the use of soft nose ammunition
Yes.
by the army themselves. That
Yeah.
that it was the way to stop and a Mahdist onrush.
Yeah.
So you've got these uh, moral arguments going on
Mm.
here as well, but at the heart of it as well is Conan Doyle's love and skill of with adventure storytelling.
Yeah.
And that's also what is going on here. Very well written.
Mm.
He's great at writing combat.
Yes.
I mean, we've said this before, in The Great Shadow, his,
Yeah.
his his incredible descriptions of the Battle of Waterloo, and here we've got a close quarter small action
Mm.
that is very well described and it's very 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 excitingly told.
Yes.
You get you really get the sense that these three characters are, they are in genuine danger.
Mm.
This isn't just an encounter with a bunch of incompetent brigands.
Yes, that's right.
This is an encounter with serious fighters,
Yeah.
and you do get that in there. And the kind of the glamour of war that always hangs over, the false glamour,
Mm.
is always going to be there, and you get this a bit from Mortimer again when he earlier says to Annalie earlier, love and poverty and war. They are all experiences
Mm.
necessary to make a complete life.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you got that philosophy there, and that's particularly interesting when you look at Doyle's correspondence at the time. He was writing. We've mentioned he was writing this play based on James Paine's novel Halves,
Mm.
and he was in correspondence with Paine. And he wrote in a letter this is from Wadi Halfa on the 17th of April 1896. Doyle to Paine. I think that war, like love and adversity and a few other primitive experiences, is a thing that one should go through in order to complete the education of life. So he's
Yeah.
quoting himself
Yes.
in the Three Correspondents. So it's for what can be regarded as almost a throwaway story,
Yeah.
putting a lot in.
Yeah, I think he is. He is,
Mm,
absolutely. And so it's at the height of this ambush that Annalie is injured and falls unconscious, and he only wakes later to discover that one of the pressmen stepped in
mm,
to finish off his attacker. But Mortimer and Scott don't really show him any great
mhm,
regard because at that point they've got a story and they have to get back to the telegraph wires. And so this sets up this quite exciting
mm,
last third of the
mm,
story, which again I think is very heavily based on Conan Doyle's personal experience.
mm,
So the whole setup is that Mortimer and Scott set off on their horses, but Annalie realizes that he could take one of the Mahdist's racing camels instead, and he's got a better chance of getting to the telegraph office in time. And that leads into this quite extended discussion of how to ride a camel,
mm.
which Conan Doyle didn't greatly
Yeah.
enjoy. But there's elements of that certainly reflected back in this. And then this rather wonderful sweeping description of the landscape as well. Classic Conan Doyle ability to convey place. The sun had already sunk behind the line of black volcanic peaks, which looked like huge slag heaps at the mouth of a mine. The western sky had taken that lovely light green and pale pink tint which makes everything beautiful upon the Nile, and the old brown river itself, swirling down amongst the black rocks, caught some shimmer of the colours above. And this is the backdrop against which Annalee on his racing camel is making his way back to Saras um, to try to get his story in time. And when he arrives at Saras, he discovers that it's 2 o'clock in the morning. He won't get his story to London before 4 o'clock, which means that he's too late. But the telegraph office informs him that actually, essentially, he's crossed one of the time zone lines, and he's got an extra hour, so he's able to make the paper's morning deadline. And so honor is saved. And more importantly, he got there before Mortimer and Scott on their horses.
The description you just quoted, it is wonderful the way that Doyle can, and he's experienced the night in the desert. When he's been out on this crazy expedition with Colonel Wilson in the Gold Coach.
Mm.
So he's describing this landscape. And this is something you do get in this story, which would this European romanticization of well, what Doyle here calls the Libyan desert.
Yes.
This whole idea that of the desert as this romantic nether place almost is coming across strongly, and this would really pick up. There's a popularity at this time, but you'd really get this in the 1920s with the growth of the desert romance as a genre with the Sheikh and Beau Geste and stories of that kind, Garden of Allah, and all of those sort of things. So you're getting that here. So you're going from this kind of brutal action, this realistic, and suddenly to what is a real landscape and describes a real camel journey, as it were. But it's also in this air of Arabian Nights fantasy almost.
Yes. But it is that fusion of realism and romance that really makes this story work, and it's timely. It's a really important moment. Andrew Lysett talks about the Egypt experience being something that allowed him to reconcile this tension between, realism and romance. And in fact, if you think back to other stories that we've covered in the past, we know that, in the early 1890s, he was experimenting with realism. He wrote things like The Curse of Eve, which we covered on a previous podcast, which, were accused of being too gritty, too realistic, almost being exposés of medical life. But when you look at any of the stories in Round the Red Lamp, though, it's not as simple as being realism. In there, you've got lot number 249. You've got this kind of fusion of the Gothic as well as realism as well. Maybe it was the Egyptian experience that allowed him to reconcile the two. It's interesting that when he gets back to England in May, it's not long after that he gives a speech to the Authors Club, referenced in this story, the Authors Club, on the 29th of June, 1896, which is about the art of storytelling. And in that, he addresses directly the reconciliation of realism and romance. So he says, the narrow esoteric schools who talk of the writing of stories as if their own particular formula embraced all virtue take themselves much too seriously. There's nothing more absurd than the realist who denies merit to the romance writer, unless it be the romance writer who sneers at the realist. A healthy taste should respond to honest works of every kind. The man who does not care for the story is an incomplete man. The man who does not care for a true study of life is an incomplete man. The man who doesn't care for anything that ever has been or can be on God's earth is an incomplete man. There is interest in every view of life, and to interest is the ultimate object of all fiction, which I think is actually quite both a kind of Macaulay sentiment and indeed a Scott sentiment there as well.
And Edgar Allan Poe.
And Edgar Allan Poe,
well.
yes, indeed, yeah. So maybe this period of his life is more pivotal, more important in that it brings about that reconciliation, and in a way you get that really strongly in another story which is heavily inspired by this period of Conan Doyle's life, which you mentioned at the beginning, which is the debut of Bimbashi Joyce.
Yeah, it's one of those stories of Doyle's that not a lot of people really notice.
Mm,
It's treated as a a kind of just an aside almost.
yeah.
It is a story around one anecdote,
Yes.
essentially. But it is also born of this time with Doyle out in the opening stages of the Sudan campaign. But rather than a journalist, this deals with a young officer, Bimbashi Hilary Joyce. Bimbashi is a term, Egyptian army term for a major,
Mm,
essentially. Whereas Joyce is actually on secondment to the Egyptian army. We found out later in the story he's Captain Joyce
yes.
in his regular regiment, which is the Mallow Fusiliers, the Royal
Yes.
Mallows, who also feature in the Crooked Man and the Green Flag.
Yes. Are
So
they actually the Royal Munsters?
there is this idea that they could be that
Right.
this
Okay.
is Doyle's disguise, and they're actually called the Royal Munsters in American editions
Oh,
of
okay.
the memoirs. Um, it's Doyle just making up an Irish regiment,
Yes,
essentially.
absolutely.
And he obviously likes the name because he uses it so often.
Mm,
But yeah, Joyce is out there seconded to the Egyptian army and is sent out to keep an eye on the frontier, essentially.
yeah.
He has a group of Sudanese soldiers with him, and he's to keep an eye on comings and goings. And the gist of the story comes when one particularly suspicious local gent, it turns up a man in flowing robes, over 6 foot tall, and Joyce arrests him. Can't get anything out of him. The man appears to be deaf and dumb. And Joyce threatens to torture him. And this is again interesting with what we've been talking about with morality. That
Mm,
Joyce, I think, gets one of his soldiers to heat up a horseshoe
he does.
to
Yeah.
wave it in his face, but he can't bring himself for anybody to actually use it. And then he just threatens them. I'm right. The next day, I'm going to flog you.
Mm,
And then in the night, the man escapes. And Joyce is mortified at his failure, and he's called in by two superiors. The head of intelligence, which is, although he's unnamed, it's Wingate,
Wingate. Yeah.
features, and the general, which is the Sirdar, Kitchener himself. And then we get a twist.
Yes, indeed. Yes, it turns out that the
Hmm.
mysterious gentleman that Joyce accosted was none other than the general himself, Kitchener, in disguise. And we know, Kitchener was an incredible intelligence officer. He'd served with Wolseley and on the Doomed campaign to relieve Gordon at Khartoum. But he spoke fluent Arabic. He was known for going undercover. And you think there might actually be a specific instant here that is being referenced in the debut of Bimbashi Joyce.
Yeah, it's as you say. Kitchener was known for these sort of exploits. I mean, he lived before taking over command in the Boer War. His career had all been centered around the Middle East. He was imbued with the culture and the history of that region of the world. And as you say, he could speak Arabic, Turkish as well. So he was very much part of that world, and he is supposed to have undergone these done various missions in disguise, and almost proto Lawrence of Arabia
Yeah, yeah.
in his way. And in 1914, when he became Minister of War on the outbreak of the First World War, uh, public interest was very strong in Kitchener, and a number of popular biographies were issued.
Mm,
And one of them was issued by the Daily Express. It was the Life of Kitchener of Khartoum by the author of Edward the Seventh. So we
yes.
don't know who actually wrote this, but it will be a journalist. It's
Mm,
it's issued under the auspices of the Express. And he tells a story about it's about the time Kitchener was intelligence officer attached to the Gordon Relief Expedition,
Mm,
where he was in charge of a camp similar to Joyce's. And they captured one Mahdist
mm,
who played deaf and dumb,
mm.
and then they captured a second who did the same thing. Um, and then a third Mahdist entered the tent, and voices were heard from within the tent, and the two apparently deaf and dumb men had opened up to this third comrade. And after an hour, the third man came out of the tent and was revealed to his troops to be none other than Lord Kitchener,
Yeah.
who had been getting all the information. And then the men, I think, turned out to be dervish spies of the worst type,
Yes.
in the words of the author. So, I mean, as I say, this story was published in 1914, but it sounds like the sort of journalistic story that would be doing the rounds
Yeah.
in the clubs and the sort of settings that Doyle would be in. So I just wonder if this specific story, or certainly another one like it, was the origins of this. And it also, Kitchener is portrayed. I mean, everyone nowadays thinks of Alfred Leet's famous poster
Yeah, the poster.
of Kitchener wants you with the pointing image.
Mm,
He's always thought as this kind of stern figure, and he did actually play up to that himself. But Doyle did get to know Kitchener a bit
mm.
in the Sudan, and he'll have seen there was a side of Kitchener that could smile and laugh, and there is an element of that going on in this story when Wingate and Kitchener call Joyce in
Yeah.
to give him a pretend roasting and then
Yes.
burst into laughter and actually admire what he's done. So that side of Kitchener feels like it could be something from Doyle's own perspective because he certainly admired Kitchener.
Yeah, and it was Kitchener actually who told him that there wasn't going to be any action and that he shouldn't really hang
Mm,
around as a war correspondent. That was
yeah.
why he came back.
Mm,
And that wonderful description of Kitchener in the Turf Club as well in one of his
mm,
letters back for the Westminster Gazette. Yeah, I think there's definitely a touch of writing from the life about this one.
mm,
As well. I mean, the whole story is a lovely story. I mean, it comes with the same kind of trigger warning as as the Three Correspondents. There's some particularly bold imperial rhetoric at the beginning of this. 10 years of lust in Khartoum, 10 years of silent work in Cairo, and then all was ready, and it was time for civilization to take a trip south once more, traveling as her wont is in an armored train.
mm,
And it came out in Punch,
mm,
right in the middle of the Boer War. So it's comes with that warning. But
mm,
the whole story itself, I think, is a wonderfully constructed little tale. I thought it was quite reminiscent, actually, of the Medal of Brigadier Gerard of
mm.
the
Yeah,
first Gerard story.
definitely. It's got the air of a Gerard story to it, though. It's
Yeah,
got one of these kind of fun, picaresque vignettes.
that's
That
right.
element to it, and it is interesting that it appeared in Punch.
Yes, absolutely.
So it's got that, and at the time, Punch is going to, the readership is wide at this
Yeah,
time, so it's going to reach a big audience. And also, as you say, there's the context of the Boer War. We've had the disasters of Black Week in December 1899, the disgrace
yeah,
of Buller, and the whole thing is then going to be put into the hands of Roberts and
mm,
Kitchener
yeah,
to
yeah,
sort out. So there is the interest in Kitchener, which had been there since his victory at Omdurman in 1898, is still there, and he's going to be the man of the moment
yeah,
with the
yeah.
Boer War. So this story is very, very timely.
Very timely, yeah, yeah.
Mm.
The other fascinating thing about this story, it always amuses me, is that the story was later reprinted. It was reprinted in
Mm.
the Princess Mary
Mm.
gift book in November 1914, and that's the book which contains certain drawings of fairies
Mm.
that were later picked up by the girls, um, and used to create their own images of the Cottingley fairies. It's always struck me as being very bizarre that Conan Doyle's short story appears in the very book that actually is the basis for the Cottingley fairies, and you never
Mm.
spotted it. But
Mm.
there you go. So that brings us to the end of this episode on the Three Correspondents. If you want to find out more, you can read the show notes at doingsofdoyle.com, and you can also find out how to become a supporter or a patron of the podcast. So, Paul, what are we doing next month?
Next month, we're going to be delving back into the Gothic and looking at some Austrian terror with a pastoral horror.
Brilliant. So, until then, it's goodbye from me.
And goodbye from me.
Goodbye. And it was shortly thereafter anthologized in The Green Flag and Other Stories of War and Sport. And it was shortly thereafter anthologized in The Green Flag and Other Warriors and Other Warriors and Other Warriors
Of store and sport.
This is, oh, bloody hell.